savage, cruel, ferocious. That's how army officers described their adversaries, a stark contrast to romanticized tales. Soldiers weren't eager for these clashes. They meant hardship, danger, and public scorn, success or failure. What drove men, who claimed to want peace, into such brutal conflicts? And what happens when distinguishing warrior from civilian becomes nearly impossible in the heat of battle? The official narratives hid some disturbing truths. The vast expanse of the American West, initially dismissed as the Great American Desert, slowly revealed its potential as a fertile and resource-rich territory. This region, known as the Plains, presented a landscape starkly different from the eastern prairies, characterized by a general absence of trees except along the arteries of rivers and streams. Upon the uplands, buffalo grass thrived, a crucial resource providing sustenance for the great herds of bison and other animals. Numerous Native American tribes inhabited this domain, a people of diverse origins and varied languages, yet many possessed the ability to communicate through a common, sophisticated sign language. Prolonged interaction among these groups sometimes led to a blending of cultural practices and belief systems. Theories regarding their origins were varied, some suggesting links to ancient Peruvian or Mexican civilizations, others to unverified early Scandinavian landfalls. Observers of the era considered Native Americans a people apart, not easily assessed by conventional societal rules. Their character was often described as a complex mix, taciturn and capable of deep dissimulation, unyielding in pursuit of revenge or conquest, masters of concealing emotion, and showing a notable lack of curiosity about the outside world, yet possessing stoical courage, profound cunning, inherent caution, and senses of astonishing power and subtlety. This portrayal diverged sharply from romanticized fictional depictions, with contemporary accounts frequently labeling them as savage, cruel, and ferocious. A key characteristic was their ability to shift their outward demeanor to suit the circumstances, whether for peaceful interaction or for war. Contrary to a prevailing notion that they were always eager to provoke a war, many army personnel and frontier settlers vehemently opposed armed conflict with Native American tribes. For the common soldier, such wars promised only arduous service, constant peril, separation from home, a dearth of basic comforts, and the likelihood of public censure regardless of outcome. Engagement in Indian wars invariably meant the curtailment of soldierly privileges like furloughs, visits with friends, or opportunities for hunting, alongside a deterioration in the quality of their rations. Peaceful Native American groups were often regarded as interesting neighbors, with opportunities for cultural exchange. Frontiersmen, too, largely desired peace. They had everything to lose, including their lives and property, and little to gain from the lucrative supply contracts that typically enriched individuals and firms situated far from the actual frontier. In the spring of 1867, Major General Winfield Scott Hancock organized an expedition. Its stated purpose was not to initiate war, but to demonstrate the Army's capability to punish tribes deemed disruptive and to secure lines of travel. The necessity for this show of force was underscored by recent killings attributed to Native Americans and widespread threats of a general uprising by hostile tribes anticipated with the coming of warmer weather. Indian agents, civilian officials responsible for specific tribes, often acknowledged the general fault of various tribes, but tended to excuse their own charges while blaming others. At Fort Dodge, General Hancock convened a council with Kiowa and Arapaho chiefs, aiming for a peaceful resolution. Satanta, a prominent Kiowa chief, offered insincere promises of future good behavior. As a gesture of goodwill, Hancock presented Satanta with a major general's uniform. Only a few weeks later, Satanta, reportedly wearing this new uniform, led an attack on the very post where the peace talks had occurred. His warriors were implicated in the Box family massacre, an event where the father and one child were slain, an infant's head was dashed against a tree, and the mother and 3 other children were taken captive. These prisoners were subsequently separated and dispersed among different bands, enduring severe physical and psychological torment. The eldest daughter, approximately 18 years old, suffered repeated sexual violence and was traded among warriors for horses. This account was later directly corroborated by the mother and daughter after their rescue. Another incident involved the Fletcher family, where a young white girl, between 4 and 7 years old, known as Little Silver Hair, was captured, while her mother and 2 other children were brutally slain. The girl reportedly lived with a chief named Cut Nose and seemed to be treated adequately, but all offers to ransom her were refused. Such events were not isolated and were cited by the military to illustrate the nature of the adversary they confronted. Following the Fort Dodge Council, Hancock's command moved towards Fort Hays. The expedition soon faced significant challenges. Shortages of essential supplies and poor quality rations led to widespread dissatisfaction. Outbreaks of diseases like scurvy and cholera, and a high rate of desertion. Dishonest contractors bore much of the blame, accused of providing substandard goods or engaging in outright fraud, such as substituting stones for food items in shipments. To supplement their meager diet and hone their skills, soldiers frequently engaged in buffalo hunts. The problem of desertion persisted until later, when Colonel George A. Custer implemented stringent measures to halt it. A contentious debate persisted regarding the administration of Indian affairs, specifically whether the Indian Bureau should be transferred from the Department of the Interior to the War Department. Army officers almost universally supported this transfer, believing it essential for achieving peace and ensuring justice for Native Americans, and they advocated for the abolition of civilian Indian agents and the system of licensed traders. Opposition to the transfer came from various individuals and powerful interest groups, collectively known as the Indian Ring, whose financial gains often depended on fraudulent practices and the exploitation of Native Americans. A common method of fraud involved the distribution of annuity goods. Agents frequently embezzled a significant portion of these government-issued supplies, selling them to traders who were often their associates or friends. Native Americans, typically unaware of the full quantity of goods they were entitled to receive, trusted the agents' declarations and were then compelled to purchase necessary items from these traders at grossly inflated prices. On occasion, tribal chiefs openly denounced the fraudulent activities of agents and traders. Army officers stationed on the frontier were aware of these injustices and viewed them as a primary cause of friction with the tribes, yet they felt powerless to intervene directly. The military communicated its views on the matter through official channels to their superiors, refraining from direct political lobbying. In contrast, the agents and traders utilized the lobby, a powerful behind-the-scenes influence in Congress, to protect their interests, often through questionable means. The position of Indian agent was highly sought after, not for its modest official salary, but for the illicit profits it afforded. As a contemporary observation noted, few ever heard of an agent or trader retiring in difficult circumstances. Major General Philip Sheridan advocated for holding Native Americans who committed crimes accountable under the same laws as white citizens. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs, representing the Interior Department's perspective in 1867, argued that refusing to provide Native Americans with firearms and ammunition was a primary cause of hostilities. Army officers strongly refuted this, contending that supplying arms merely equipped tribes for further depredations, as they consistently sought modern weaponry for warfare rather than solely for hunting. General Hancock's command had already issued orders to halt the sale or distribution of arms to Native Americans in his operational area. Generals William T. Sherman and Ulysses S. Grant both endorsed Hancock's actions and vigorously lobbied for the Indian Bureau's transfer to the War Department, viewing it as the sole means to avert either a full-scale war of extermination or the eventual destruction of the tribes. General John Pope articulated detailed arguments supporting the transfer, citing the existing divided jurisdiction, which led to a lack of coordination, instances where civilian agents interfered with and undermined successful military operations, and the demonstrable dishonesty of many agents. Pope emphasized that Army officers desired peace to avoid the hardships and separations of campaigning, whereas agents often benefited financially from periods of conflict and treaty negotiations. Colonel Ely S. Parker, Himself a Seneca chief, and later appointed Commissioner of Indian Affairs by President Grant, also supported the transfer and the abolition of the trader system, asserting that Army officers would manage affairs with greater integrity. Parker also noted that, contrary to popular sentiment, migrating Native American groups generally placed little importance on the specific locations of ancestral graves. Despite his appointment, Parker was eventually compelled to resign due to pressure from advocates of the prevailing peace policy. In the autumn of 1867, the Medicine Lodge Treaty was negotiated. This involved the distribution of gifts, with those tribes perceived as most troublesome, often receiving the largest share, and the formal establishment of reservations. The treaty promised a new era of peace, but this tranquility proved to be exceptionally brief. Military life on the plains involved rigorous drills and constant preparation for arduous campaigns. Following the events at Fort Hays, the 1867 expedition under Major General Hancock continued its general movement, with Colonel Custer's command also operating in the region, eventually marching towards Fort McPherson and other designated points. Before departing Fort Hays, however, Custer's encampment was abruptly inundated by a sudden flash flood on Big Creek. The rising waters swept away tents and vital supplies, and for a brief period posed a serious threat to the lives of Custer's wife and other non-combatants present with the column. Compounding the natural hazards was a severe crisis of desertion. The difficult conditions and perceived lack of purpose in the campaign led to plummeting morale, with more than 40 soldiers deserting in a single night. Determined to stem this critical loss of manpower, Custer dispatched a pursuit party with explicit orders to bring the deserters back, dead or alive. These harsh measures, including the shooting of several captured deserters as an example, proved effective in halting further large-scale desertions from his immediate command. In operations aimed at locating and engaging hostile Native American bands, the Army relied heavily on experienced frontier scouts. Among the most notable attached to Custer's command during this period were Moses Will, Comstock, and James Butler, Wild Bill, Hickok. Comstock possessed an extraordinary knowledge of the Plains territories, its various tribes, and their languages, including sophisticated sign language. He was noted for his bravery, yet maintained a modest demeanor. Wild Bill Hickok was already a figure of frontier legend, a renowned marksman known for his calm composure under pressure and considerable influence among frontiersmen. He had reportedly been involved in numerous lethal confrontations, yet always emerged unscathed. The prevailing law on the frontier was often that of might makes right, where disputes, including killings, were frequently settled by impromptu citizen committees, often ruling such actions as justifiable self-defense. Comstock repeatedly demonstrated his exceptional tracking skills, accurately reading trail signs and predicting the movements of Native American parties, including one instance where he precisely foretold the location of an impending attack on a stagecoach line. During one pursuit, a small detachment under Custer's direct command came upon a recently abandoned Native American village during the night. The inhabitants had evidently departed in great haste, leaving behind many of their belongings, including lodges and personal items, but no Native Americans were present. A search of the lodges revealed an individual, described as a half-breed, who had apparently been left behind. In one of the lodges, an unfinished meal was discovered simmering over a fire. Its contents were identified as dog meat, a revelation that reportedly caused a medical officer accompanying the party to become physically ill. The pursuit of the departed Native Americans continued, with the trail indicating a hurried flight, as more discarded equipment was found along their path. The situation became increasingly challenging for the pursuing cavalry, when the main trail suddenly fragmented into hundreds of smaller, diverging tracks, a common tactic used by plains tribes to elude pursuers. With darkness approaching and water supplies exhausted, Custer was forced to halt the chase and order his men to turn back in search of a water source. During this return march, Custer himself had a personal, unhorsed encounter with a large buffalo bull, from which he emerged unharmed. Custer then directed his command towards the Smoky Hill route, intending to warn the isolated stagecoach stations along this vital line of communication and transport of the heightened Native American activity in the area. A peculiar incident occurred when one of Custer's own night patrols, disoriented in the darkness, mistook their own unit's main camp for a hostile Native American village and were on the verge of opening fire before the error was recognized. Tragically, subsequent reports confirmed that Native American war parties had indeed been active along the route, attacking and burning several stations, including Lookout Station. The personnel at these stations were often slain, their bodies frequently subjected to torture and burning. Major General Hancock later expressed the view that the earlier destruction of a deserted Cheyenne village, an event attributed to his orders during the campaign, had been a necessary act to punish what he considered the tribe's treachery and continued hostile acts. The column pressed on, enduring marches such as a 65-mile trek under a scorching sun with no water. Upon reaching the Platte River, Colonel Custer received a telegraphic dispatch. Lieutenant Lyman Kidder, with a detachment of 10 men from the 2nd Cavalry and a Sioux scout named Red Bead, had been sent with important dispatches to locate Custer's command. A sense of unease spread through the unit. Kidder's party numbered only 11, and intelligence confirmed that hostile tribes were actively engaged in warfare. The experienced scout Moses Will Comstock voiced his skepticism regarding the detachment's chances of safe passage, particularly if Lieutenant Kidder was new to the frontier. After turning back towards the forks of the Republican River, the command picked up Kidder's trail leading towards Fort Wallace. The tracks indicated that the small detachment had initially moved without apparent difficulty, showing no signs of pursuit at a key river crossing. Despite this, Comstock maintained a cautious outlook, warning of potential encounters. Subsequently, the command made a grim discovery. The remains of Lieutenant Kidder, his 10 soldiers, and Red Bead, all had been slain. Their bodies were severely mutilated, some burned, and all were pierced by numerous arrows, between 20 and 50 each, rendering immediate identification nearly impossible. The specific details of the engagement remained unknown, but the condition of the site suggested they had made a desperate stand. The men were interred in a common grave near where they fell. Later, Lieutenant Kidder's remains were identified by a distinctive shirt collar his mother had prepared. His family subsequently traveled to Fort Wallace to claim his body. Approximately 1 month following the Kidder massacre, an army wagon train under the command of Lieutenant Robbins, escorted by 48 troopers and guided by Comstock, was attacked by a force estimated at 600 to 700 warriors near Fort Wallace. Comstock had, with remarkable accuracy, predicted the very location of the assault. The Native American warriors initiated their attack, employing a formal line of battle, and then transitioned to circling tactics. The soldiers quickly formed a defensive perimeter, dismounting to fight from behind the cover of the circled wagons, their horses secured within the enclosure. The cavalrymen, armed with Spencer repeating carbines, delivered effective fire, inflicting considerable casualties upon the attackers and their mounts. After each repulsed assault, Comstock reportedly shouted taunts at the warriors in their own languages. The warriors demonstrated exceptional equestrian skill, frequently concealing their bodies by hanging alongside their ponies, exposing only a head and one leg to enemy fire. After 3 hours of continuous combat, the defenders' ammunition ran critically low. The timely arrival of a relief column under Colonel West, whose approach was detected by the warriors' own distant scouts, compelled the attacking force to withdraw. The meeting of the two army units was met with considerable relief and celebration. The winter of 1867 to 1868 passed with relative quiet for the troops stationed on the plains, but with the arrival of spring 1868, Native American depredations against frontier settlements resumed. General Alfred Sully organized patrols, but these proved largely ineffective, as warrior bands continued to evade regular army columns while striking isolated civilian targets. Public indignation escalated in Kansas and Colorado, following a series of attacks and burnings. Demands were made upon the federal government to provide protection, or alternatively, to authorize citizens to arm themselves for collective self-defense. General Philip Sheridan, commanding the military department, began organizing a significant military response, placing particular reliance on experienced frontier scouts. A winter campaign was planned, targeting hostile tribes in their traditional winter encampments, a time when they were considered most vulnerable. A specialized unit of 50 scouts was formed under the command of Major George A. Forsyth, intended to operate using tactics similar to those of Native American war parties. Their primary objective was to locate hostile bands, a task often proving difficult for larger, conventional military forces. Forsyth's expedition resulted in the Battle of Arickaree Fork, more commonly known as the Battle of Beecher Island. Here, Forsyth's 50 scouts defended themselves for several days against a numerically superior force of Cheyenne Dog soldiers, Arapaho, and Sioux warriors. The scouts hastily constructed an improvised defensive position from sand and earth on a small island in the riverbed. The attacking warriors suffered significant losses, including prominent leaders such as Roman Nose, whose fall was a severe blow. Major Forsyth and Lieutenant Frederick H. Beecher sustained serious wounds. Several scouts, including Trudeau, Stilwell, Donovan, and Plyley, were dispatched under extreme peril to seek relief. The besieged unit exhausted its rations and was reduced to eating the putrid flesh of their dead horses and mules. A relief column eventually reached them, rescuing the survivors. The battle inflicted heavy casualties on both sides, but particularly upon the attacking Native American force. One notably brutal incident reported during this period was the slaying and scalping of an Army bugler boy near Fort Wallace. Colonel Custer returned to active field service in the autumn of 1868, following a period he termed an involuntary retirement. He was recalled by General Sheridan to participate in the planned winter campaign. Custer's regiment, the 7th Cavalry, established a camp near Fort Dodge, where they endured almost daily attacks by Native American warriors, finding themselves in a state of virtual siege. Custer resolved to shift from a defensive posture to an offensive one, organizing aggressive night patrols. His available force included the 7th U.S. Cavalry, skilled civilian scouts such as California Joe Milnes, and allied Native American scouts from the Osage and Core tribes. The strategy of a winter campaign was predicated on the understanding that Native American tribes were generally less mobile and more vulnerable during winter months due to the scarcity of forage for their ponies and the difficulty of moving their villages in harsh weather. Attacking during this season was contrary to the usual expectations of the Plains tribes and was intended to provide the army with a tactical advantage. Significant emphasis was placed on marksmanship training, with rigorous practice for designated sharpshooters to improve combat effectiveness. The forces assembled for the 1868 to 1869 winter campaign included the 7th Cavalry, elements of the 3rd Infantry, and later the 19th Kansas Volunteer Cavalry. The establishment of a forward supply base, known as Camp Supply, and the organization of a massive supply train were critical logistical undertakings for the campaign's success. A severe blizzard that struck the region was regarded by some in the army as a fortuitous ally. While the storm impeded the army's movements, it was believed to be even more detrimental to the ability of Native American bands to relocate their villages. After several days of difficult marching through heavy snow, Custer's scouts discovered the trail of a large Native American war party, estimated at 100 to 150 warriors, heading north towards Kansas. Custer expressed a desire to immediately backtrack this trail to locate the warriors' village, but this course of action was initially forbidden by his superior, General Sully. However, shortly thereafter, General Sully was relieved of command of the expedition, and Custer was granted full authority to proceed with the search and subsequent punitive action against the hostile tribes. The command resumed its march through the continuing snowstorm, relying on compasses for navigation in the disorienting conditions. On the night of the 26th of November, -27, 1868, the scouts located the fresh trail of a Native American village and a large pony herd in the valley of the Washita River. A mysterious, intermittent light spotted by the scouts caused some initial alarm, but was later discovered to be California Joe, who, having consumed alcohol, was striking matches to light his pipe. Custer formulated a plan to surround the unsuspecting village with 4 converging detachments before dawn. The troops moved with utmost silence through the freezing night to avoid detection. Some of the Osage scouts initially expressed doubt about the enterprise's success and indicated an intention to position themselves behind Custer's personal guidon-bearer if fighting commenced. In contrast, the white scouts, particularly California Joe, were confident that a decisive engagement was imminent, predicting they would either sweep the platter or the enemy would be utterly routed. The attack commenced at first light on the 27th of November, signaled by a single, possibly accidental gunshot, followed immediately by the regimental band striking up the lively tune, Gary Owen. The village targeted was that of the Cheyenne chief Black Kettle. Though taken by surprise, the Cheyenne warriors quickly rallied and offered determined resistance from the cover of trees and the riverbanks. A significant challenge for the attacking soldiers was distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants, as numerous women and boys as young as 10 to 15 years old actively participated in the defense. Specific instances of fierce resistance by non-warriors were noted, including a young boy who attacked Major Benteen and a Cheyenne woman who, before being shot, slew a white male captive. The cavalrymen were compelled to dismount and fight on foot to dislodge the defenders from their entrenched positions. A substantial number of warriors were slain within the village and in nearby ravines. One gully reportedly held the bodies of 38 warriors. Women and children who remained concealed within their lodges were not harmed and were assured of their safety by the soldiers. After the immediate fighting in Black Kettle's village subsided, Custer made a critical discovery. Situated just downstream were the extensive winter encampments of virtually all the other hostile tribes of the Southern Plains, including Arapaho, Kiowa, the remaining Cheyenne bands, Comanche, and Apache. Warriors from these adjacent villages rapidly mobilized and soon enveloped Custer's relatively small command. The timely arrival of Major Bell with the ammunition supply train proved crucial. The engagement then transformed into a defensive action, with the 7th Cavalry forming a perimeter and fighting off attacks from all directions. It was observed that the warriors from the downstream villages fought with greater caution, possibly influenced by the swift destruction of Black Kettle's camp. Black Kettle's village was completely destroyed. Lodges and all property were burned. The cavalry captured a large number of Native American ponies, later counted at 875 head. Custer now faced a perilous situation. His command was surrounded, encumbered with prisoners and wounded, responsible for a large captured pony herd, and deeply concerned for the safety of its vulnerable supply train. He resolved to act upon a key principle of warfare, to do that which the enemy least expects or desires. This led to a harsh, but, in his judgment, necessary decision. He ordered the execution of nearly 800 of the captured ponies. Custer later met with the captured women and children, assuring them of good treatment. Among them was Malwisa, a sister of Black Kettle, who told Custer that she had foreseen the village's doom and had warned her brother against continuing raids on white settlements. In accordance with what she described as tribal custom, Malwisa attempted to arrange a marriage between Custer and one of the young captive women, an offer Custer politely declined. The interpreter, Rafael Romero, suggested to Custer that Malwisa's offer might have been a stratagem to make Custer responsible for the young woman's entire extended family. During the battle, Custer's staghound, Blucher, was lost, presumably to warrior action. The fate of Major Joel Elliott and a detached party of 19 men remained unknown for some time. Elliott's group had pursued a band of fleeing warriors and had evidently been cut off and ambushed. Their bodies were discovered later, all severely mutilated. This discovery was subsequently used by the army as stark evidence of the brutality of their opponents. The remains of a white woman and child were also reportedly found within Satanta's Kiowa village in the aftermath of these events. Following the engagement at the Washita River, Custer's command moved towards Camp Supply, bringing with them prisoners and captured materiel. Custer dispatched California Joe and Jack Corbin to carry official reports of the victory to General Sheridan, who was then at Camp Supply. California Joe, a seasoned scout, exhibited considerable confidence in his ability to navigate hostile territory. In response, General Sheridan issued General Field Orders No. 6, commending Custer's regiment for its energy, rapidity of movement, bravery, and the success of the operation. The Battle of the Washita, however, ignited significant public criticism, particularly from individuals associated with the Indian Ring and advocates of the peace policy. Allegations arose that Black Kettle's village had been friendly, or even that some of its inhabitants had previously served as scouts for the Union Army. Custer dismissed these accusations as erroneous. The Secretary of War conveyed his congratulations to Generals Sherman and Sheridan, and to Colonel Custer for the outcome. After a brief period at Camp Supply, the command was substantially reinforced, its strength nearly doubled, and it resumed its campaign, moving south. The objective of this new phase was to compel the remaining hostile tribes, primarily the Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, to accept terms of peace and relocate to their designated reservations. As the column neared the Fort Cobb area, a group of Native Americans approached under a flag of peace. Custer then received a dispatch from General William B. Hazen, who was serving as a special agent for the Southern Indian District. Hazen's communication certified that the tribes in the immediate vicinity of Fort Cobb were friendly and had taken no part in the war this season. However, almost simultaneously, one of Custer's own scouts, who had accompanied Hazen's messenger, was taken prisoner by Kiowa warriors operating under the authority of Chiefs Lone Wolf and Satanta, the very leaders Hazen had vouched for. When Custer subsequently met with the Kiowa chiefs, who again approached under a flag of peace, he observed that they and their warriors were fully armed and equipped for war, a direct contradiction to Hazen's assessment. Furthermore, Custer possessed intelligence, including a report from the interpreter Philip McCuskey, dated the 3rd of December, indicating that Kiowa and Comanche warriors had indeed participated in the Battle of the Washita. Satanta and Lone Wolf, the two most influential Kiowa chiefs, agreed to accompany Custer's column to Fort Cobb and to dispatch a messenger to their village, ostensibly to urge their people to move to the agency. Custer suspected their actual intent was to allow their village more time to move further away from the approaching troops, but he permitted several lesser chiefs to depart gradually. Ultimately, as they neared Fort Cobb, Custer ordered the arrest of Satanta and Lone Wolf, intending to hold them as hostages to compel the Kiowa tribe's compliance with the directive to move onto the reservation. Both chiefs maintained a stoic demeanor when informed of their detention. An attempt by other Kiowa chiefs to signal a rescue by messengers positioned at a distance proved unsuccessful. Satanta's son was permitted access to the military camp to act as a liaison with the Kiowa village. Satanta and Lone Wolf then used the young man to convey their orders for the tribe to proceed to the reservation. Lone Wolf expressed his belief that the tribe would arrive in time to secure their release. True to Lone Wolf's prediction, a contingent of Kiowa chiefs, led by Black Eagle, arrived at Custer's camp by the stipulated time. Black Eagle announced that the entire Kiowa village was en route to Fort Cobb, though he did not explicitly acknowledge that this movement was a result of coercion. The arrival of Satanta's wife and children at the camp occasioned a display of familial affection, with Satanta notably kissing each of his children. The main body of the Kiowa tribe eventually arrived at the designated reservation area, with the exception of a single band under a chief named Woman Heart. Satanta and Lone Wolf remained under close guard but appeared to be comfortable. Lone Wolf even requested supplies to host a feast for visiting chiefs, a request Custer granted on the condition that guests indeed arrived. With the Kiowa situation temporarily stabilized, the Army's attention shifted towards the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. A peace delegation was dispatched, including an Apache chief named Iron Shirt and Mawissa, the sister of the late Cheyenne chief Black Kettle. They carried a clear message. Tribes that came into the reservation would be considered friends. Those who refused would face continued military action. Custer held particular hope for Mawissa's influence, as she was known to desire peace. Iron Shirt returned to Custer's camp after an absence of 3 weeks, but Mawissa was not with him. He reported that the Cheyenne and Arapaho villages were located a great distance away, their ponies were in poor condition, and the tribes were unwilling to return to the reservation, expressing a preference for continued warfare. According to Iron Shirt, the Cheyenne chiefs had prevented Mawissa from rejoining the delegation. However, he also conveyed that two influential chiefs, Little Robe of the Cheyenne and Yellow Bear of the Arapaho, personally desired peace and had promised to visit Custer's camp. The command waited for these chiefs, but they failed to appear, leading Custer to conclude they were employing delaying tactics, hoping to postpone any further action until the spring. Custer then proposed a bold and hazardous plan. He would personally lead a small detachment of 40 men to the hostile villages to directly negotiate with the chiefs. Many within his command regarded this undertaking as exceedingly reckless. One concerned officer presented Custer with a spare revolver. A young civilian named Brewster, who was searching for his sister, a Mrs. Morgan, believed to be a captive among the Cheyenne, earnestly requested permission to accompany the detachment. Brewster had received information from Little Robe that the Cheyenne were indeed holding 2 white female captives, and the description provided matched that of his sister. Custer reluctantly granted him permission to join. Custer's small party, which included his brother, several officers, a surgeon, and scouts, set out, accompanied by Little Robe and Yellow Bear. Yellow Bear guided them to the Arapaho village. The detachment met with the Arapaho under Chief Little Raven. Negotiations proceeded peacefully, and the Arapaho leaders pledged to move their village to the reservation. Little Raven agreed to provide 2 young Arapaho warriors to assist Custer in locating the Cheyenne encampment. The Arapaho village then began its movement towards the reservation, with Yellow Bear accompanying them, carrying dispatches from Custer to General Sheridan. Custer's detachment remained in place to await a supply escort led by Colonel Cook. Colonel Cook arrived with 13 men, including California Joe, reporting that they had encountered a large party of Native Americans en route, but no conflict had occurred. Meanwhile, Neva, one of Custer's scouts, who had set out with Brewster and the 2 Arapaho guides to find the Cheyenne village, returned. Neva reported that the trail of the Cheyenne village was old, and indicated they had moved a considerable distance to the west. Brewster, still determined to find his sister, had accompanied Neva on this unsuccessful search. Following these events, Custer's command returned to their main camp, where they found that the Arapaho tribe had kept their promise and established their village near the agency as agreed. With the Arapaho having proceeded to their designated reservation, Custer, now commanding a significantly larger force of approximately 1,500 men comprising the 7th Cavalry, Kansas Volunteers, and Osage Scouts, resumed the search for the recalcitrant Cheyenne. Prior to this, the Kiowa chiefs Satanta and Lone Wolf had been released after a substantial portion of their tribe arrived at the agency, and the chiefs themselves swore to maintain peace, a pledge General Sheridan received with a stern warning. Custer remained deeply skeptical of these promises, a skepticism later justified when Satanta and another chief, Big Tree, resumed hostilities. During the renewed search for the Cheyenne, scouts detected a distant column of smoke, which led the command to a recently occupied Native American camp. The army launched a surprise attack, quickly overrunning the camp and capturing its pony herd, but the Cheyenne warriors managed to escape, having been alerted by the barking of their dogs. The pursuit continued, with the command following a single lodge trail, the track of a solitary tipi being dragged, which the female Pawnee scout, Monacita, also referred to as Miotzi, identified as belonging to a small band making its way towards the main Cheyenne tribal encampment. Following this trail, and guided by the expert tracking skills of the scouts, particularly Monacita, Custer successfully located the main Cheyenne village. This encampment belonged to the band of Chief Medicine Arrow, and also included the smaller contingent under Little Robe. Custer met with Medicine Arrow, who requested that Custer enter the village alone, ahead of his troops, to demonstrate peaceful intentions and reassure the inhabitants. Custer agreed to this considerable personal risk, reasoning that the close proximity of his large military force would compel the Cheyenne to ensure his safety. Within the village, Custer participated in a pipe of peace ceremony with Medicine Arrow and the tribe's medicine man, an unfamiliar and somewhat uncomfortable experience for Custer, who was not a smoker. During this time, Montecito confirmed that 2 white female captives were indeed being held within Medicine Arrow's village. Observing that the Cheyenne in the village were making preparations to flee, Custer resolved to take several of their chiefs as hostages to compel the surrender of the white women. He invited a number of chiefs to his temporary camp, ostensibly for further talks. Then, while a group of Cheyenne warriors performed a display for the soldiers, Custer had his troops discreetly surround the invited chiefs. He then announced their detention, assuring them of their safety, provided they cooperated. A brief struggle ensued, during which most of the Cheyenne present managed to escape, but Custer's men successfully secured 4 important chiefs as hostages. Custer then issued a stern ultimatum. The Cheyenne were to surrender the 2 white female captives by sunset of the following day, and the entire tribe was to proceed to the reservation near Camp Supply. Failure to comply would result in the execution by hanging of the 3 most prominent of the captive chiefs, followed by a relentless military pursuit of their village. One of the lesser chiefs was released to carry this ultimatum back to the Cheyenne village. Later, Little Robe came to Custer's camp, expressing his sincere desire for peace and offering his assistance in securing the captives' release, though he acknowledged his influence within the tribe was limited. Custer provided food for Little Robe and his followers. As the deadline approached, an atmosphere of intense anxiety pervaded both the captive chiefs and Custer's entire command. One of the captive chiefs directly asked Custer if he genuinely intended to carry out his threat of execution. Custer affirmed that he would. Approximately 1 hour before sunset, a party of Cheyenne was observed approaching Custer's camp, bringing with them 2 individuals. Young Brewster, who had accompanied Custer, recognized his sister, Mrs. Morgan, among them and rushed to meet her. The 2 white women, Mrs. Morgan and Miss White, were thus rescued. Custer, however, refused to release the hostage chiefs until the Cheyenne tribe began its movement towards the designated reservation. The Cheyenne leadership agreed to these terms, promising to relocate to the vicinity of Camp Supply as soon as their ponies had recovered sufficiently for the journey. This particular band of Cheyenne reportedly adhered to this agreement thereafter. The winter campaign of 1868 to 1869 thus concluded. Custer received a letter of commendation from General Sheridan, praising the success achieved and the fortitude displayed by the troops under his command. The Arapaho tribe honored their commitment, settled on their reservation, and maintained peaceful relations. Similarly, the Cheyenne adhered to their agreement, moved to their designated reservation, and also remained at peace. The women and children taken prisoner at the Battle of the Washita were transported to Camp Supply and reunited with their respective tribes. Montecito, the scout, reportedly expressed sorrow upon her departure from the command. Romeo, the interpreter, subsequently married a Cheyenne woman and established himself as a trader. Despite their release and pledges of peace, Satanta and Lone Wolf later resumed hostile activities. Satanta was eventually arrested and tried for murder in Texas. He was convicted and sentenced to death, though this sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. After a period of incarceration, he was paroled, but soon renewed his depredations. Yellow Bear rose to become the 2nd chief of the Arapaho. Little Robe eventually passed away. California Joe, after experiencing a brief encounter with civilization at Fort Hays, returned to his preferred nomadic lifestyle in the mountains. Years later, he sent a letter to Custer from the Sierra Nevada, recounting his impressions of modern society. Custer himself concluded his service on the southern and middle plains, noting that a state of relative peace had been established on the Kansas frontier following the Washita campaign. He also alluded to making preparations for a new expedition to explore a then unknown region, likely a reference to the Black Hills. Military service on the plains during this era was characterized by extreme hardship and constant danger, yet it also furnished moments that remained deeply memorable for those who experienced it. These campaigns shaped a new reality on the plains, achieved through harsh measures and relentless pressure. The interactions between cultures, marked by conflict and negotiation, left an indelible mark on the land and its peoples, altering their paths irrevocably. Explore more complex narratives from the American West. Subscribe for further insights into these pivotal historical events.